Hey there, my name is Jessica Hadaway, and I will be reviewing Chapter 2 and 3 of Coercion and its fallout. We begin with Chapter 2, Not All Control is Coercion. In the beginning of Chapter 2, it discusses behavioral control. Within that section, we talk about coercive control, which is the escape from which gives rise to the concept of freedom. Most people tend to believe that control and coercion are the same thing. However, as we continue to read, we learn that coercion is actually just a subcategory of control. Many people also believe that behavioral analysis is the same as the science of coercion. However, behavior analysts acknowledge the existence of behavior control, and they study it to make it work for our benefit by substituting it with non-coercive methods. We then look into behavior. Behavior is anything that we do, such as talking, watching TV, walking, whereas there's also private behavior, which is a behavior that's not accessible to others, such as thinking or feeling or talking to ourselves. We then look at behavior and its consequences. The most fundamental law of conduct is that consequences control our behavior. The consequences of what we have done will determine whether we are going to do them again in the future or not. This is kind of where responsibility comes into play. If you are aware that if you speed past that stop sign, you're going to get a ticket. It makes it so that you're more likely in the future to not speed past the stop sign and not stop. That is the essence of responsibility, knowing that doing something is going to cause a reaction will make it more likely for you to either not do it or do it in the future. We then move on to what is coercion. Many see coercion as being compelled to do something against their will, whereas behavior analysts see that all behavior is controlled, therefore everything that we do is against our will. It's a very deterministic view. There are also classes of consequences that control our behavior. Those would be positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and punishment. Within that, to be a reinforcer, they must also follow an action, and then that action, to be a reinforcer, they must follow an action, and then it must cause the action followed to be repeated in the future. There are two elements to the definition of reinforcement, first of which, as I mentioned before, the action comes first, and then the reinforcer. Secondly is functionality. The reinforcer must follow an act in order to make the act more likely to be repeated. So first comes the tantrum, and then comes the withholding of the treat. So the child knows that the tantrum, if they stop the tantrum, they can get the treat. So reinforcers, like I mentioned, the treat, it can be a number of things from sweets to praise, TV time. Discovering what reinforcers are can help us to answer questions about our own or others' conducts, because reinforcers can be anything from conditioned reinforcers to non-conditioned reinforcers. Really, if you look at it, there are so many reinforcers that we have throughout the day that you don't even think you are constantly being reinforced. So knowing what reinforcers are, those can help us. We can use those as behavior analysts to replace undesirable behaviors. We keep track of the correlation between conduct and consequences, and it allows us to counteract problems with effective teaching methods. So we look to see what certain reinforcers are for our clients, and then in the future use that to gain effective teaching methods. We gain progress. Reinforcement can also be viewed as an if-then relation. If we act a different way, then the reinforcer won't come. Reinforcement contingencies are a fundamental source of behavior control. There are two different types of reinforcement. There's positive and negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is an action that is followed by the addition of something new, whereas negative reinforcement is an action that's followed by the removal of something that was there before the act. So within that, there's two major categories of control that are defined as coercive, because positive reinforcement is not seen as a coercive. The two that would be negative reinforcement and punishment. Punishment occurs when an action is followed by either the loss of a positive or the gain of a negative reinforcer. It is a contingency between conduct and consequences. When a termination of an event is negatively reinforcing, that is a punisher. A punisher must be present before a negative reinforcement can take place. Control by positive reinforcement is non-coercive, where negative reinforcement and punishment are coercive. And that's kind of the ending of chapter 2. So we know that positive reinforcement is non-coercive, negative and punishment are coercive. And we discuss punishment more in the future of the book. So we go on to chapter 3, which is ivory laboratory or glass house. It starts off with, can conduct be analyzed? Behavior can be analyzed, it can be shaped, it can be controlled. Behavior analysis deals with the management of our own and others' conduct. What does it mean to do an experiment? Behavior analysis is an experimental and applied science. In it, we identify the behavior we're interested in, we specify any elements of the situation that we might expect to influence the behavior. A fundamental part, the most important part of an experiment is to make sure that the data and the data gathering techniques are available for public evaluation, as well as to specify the behavioral measurements, the steps taken, and all of this is to ensure that the data is consistent and reliable. All the measurement techniques and data must be available for evaluation by others. So essentially, if an experiment is done, it must have the information available to make it replicable by others in order to make it a valid research. So it must describe aspects that may have affected the study. That way, for future studies, they know that that is a key part of why the study got the results that it did. We then move on to From Mouse to Mankind, which is looking to see what can a small creature such as a mouse tell us about human conduct. And beginning at the study, we must decide what we're going to look at and if it has validity. An experiment such that is that with a mouse, we can look at many different things. In this particular experiment, they look at if a mouse is in a cage and there's a button that they push and food comes out. How long before they learn that pushing that button is what gains them food? Through the experimentation, we can determine that the food is what is maintaining the mouse pushing the button. This can show the consequences that determine behavior. So we can use that to see that for people, if you enough times repeat the same steps and you gain the same reinforcer, that it's going to enhance the likeliness that that behavior is going to occur in the future. So the question that I am going to ask is that as a behavior analyst, how might you describe coercive control in a less negative way to someone to help them understand kind of what it is that we do, since coercive control is in essence a big part of what we do. It kind of falls to the deterministic approach. How do you describe to someone that everything that we do kind of has a reason? You guys have a good night.